The moment my son threw my suitcase onto the front porch, I knew 12 years of silence were about to become the best investment I ever made. I stood there in my Sunday dress, watching my own child shut me out like I was nothing but disposable clutter. What James and Jessica didn't realize was that this clutter would one day turn into $8 million. If you're here listening, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. Let me share how a 60-year-old woman went from having no roof over her head to owning the most expensive mansion in Milbrook Heights. Because, darling, revenge isn't about serving it cold, it's about serving it with undeniable success. My name is Margaret Williams, though most just call me Maggie. Now at 72, I've learned there's nothing sweeter than making the very people who doubted you wish they hadn't. And my son James, along with his wife Jessica, gave me more than enough reason to prove them wrong. It all began on October 15th, 2012. My husband had recently passed, and I'd been living with James and Jessica for 3 months, helping with their little ones while I tried to figure out what was next. The life insurance payout was small, but I thought family meant supporting one another in hard times. "Mom, we need to talk," James said one morning, his voice colder than I had ever heard. Jessica hovered behind him, arms crossed, her smug look cutting deeper than words. At 33, she carried a kind of sharp beauty that could wound anyone who got too close. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" I asked, setting down my coffee on the granite counter, the very counter I had helped them pay for with my Social Security checks. "This arrangement isn't working," Jessica cut in, stepping forward as though she owned the conversation. "You're too set in your ways. The children don't know who's really in charge." I turned to James, hoping he would defend me, his mother, the woman who had raised him alone after his father walked out when he was just 8, but he wouldn't even meet my eyes. "Where am I supposed to go?" I whispered. "That's not our responsibility," Jessica replied with a shrug that would haunt me for years. "You're an adult. Figure it out." 20 minutes later, my whole life was crammed into 2 suitcases and a cardboard box. 60 years of photographs, keepsakes, and memories stripped down to what I could carry. Jessica cheerfully informed me that the rest would be donated to Goodwill. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," James muttered, as he placed my bags on the porch. For just a moment, I saw a flicker of the little boy who once cried when I left for work. But then Jessica stepped beside him and that look disappeared. The taxi arrived just as the first raindrops fell. I climbed in without turning back, not because I was strong, but because I was broken. Through the window, I caught one last glimpse of Jessica already redecorating the room I had just left. I had $847 in my purse. No job, nowhere to call home. What I didn't have was the slightest idea that this humiliation would become the fuel for the greatest comeback story of my life. The Sunset Motel on Route 9 became my home for the next 6 weeks. And let me tell you, it was exactly as glamorous as it sounds. $43 a night for a room that smelled like industrial cleaner and broken dreams. But it had a roof and a door that locked. After being thrown away like trash, even that felt like a luxury. The elderly desk clerk, Mr. Patterson, took pity on me after the first week. "You're not like our usual guests," he said quietly, sliding an extra towel across the counter. Most of their clientele was either working construction jobs or hiding from something. I was just hiding from the truth that my own son had discarded me. Those first mornings were the hardest. I'd wake up in that narrow bed, forgetting for just a moment where I was, and then reality would hit like a slap. No laughter from my grandchildren, no breakfast to prepare, just me and the groaning air conditioner that sounded like a dying whale. But here's the thing James and Jessica never saw coming. I've never been the kind of woman to stay down. Not then, not now. When James was a child and money was non-existent, I juggled 3 jobs just to keep a roof over our heads. I scrubbed office floors at night, worked the cash register during the day, and pressed clothes on the weekends. Survival wasn't new to me. I had simply forgotten how strong I was at it. My first step was walking to the library every morning. It gave me free internet, free air conditioning, and most importantly, free access to job listings. At 60, employers weren't exactly clamoring to hire me, but I wasn't searching for pity. I wanted a chance, asked Sarah Mitchell, the owner of Mitchell's Garden Center, during my fourth interview that week. She was about my age, with soil under her nails and the kind of blunt honesty I admired instantly. 20 years, I answered. I had managed all the accounts for my late husband's contracting company. What I didn't mention was that within 10 minutes of sitting in her cluttered office, I had already spotted 3 different ways her business was bleeding money. The inventory system was chaos. She was paying too much to suppliers, and her pricing hadn't been updated since 2008. The pay's not much, Sarah warned. $15 an hour, part-time. When do I start? I asked without hesitation. That first paycheck was only $240, but to me it felt like winning the lottery. After 6 weeks of watching my savings shrink day by day, holding money I had earned again felt like finally breaking the surface after being underwater too long. The shabby motel room began to feel a little less temporary. I bought a tiny coffee pot, pinned my family photos on the wall, and even treated myself to a plant for the windowsill. If this was my new beginning, I was determined to live it with dignity. 3 months later, I stumbled onto my first real breakthrough. Sarah told me she tossed out thousands of dollars worth of unsold plants every year. By the end of the season, anything that didn't sell went into the dumpster. It's just how it works, she shrugged. But I saw possibility. You want to do what with the dead plants? Sarah asked me, staring at me like I had suggested bottling moonlight. They're not dead, I explained calmly. They're dormant. With some care, most of them can bounce back and be sold again. I'd moved out of the motel and into a small studio above Jeppy's Pizza. The rent was $650, which left me barely $15 after groceries, but it was mine alone. No one could throw me out this time. Sarah humored me by letting me take 3 truckloads of discarded plants home that November. I'm sure she thought it would teach me some harsh lesson about business reality. Instead, it taught me something else. I had a gift I never knew existed. Soon, every surface of my studio was crowded with pots and planters. Windowsills, counters, even the floor. I researched endlessly at the library, devoured YouTube tutorials, and spent evenings coaxing wilted stems back to life. The neighbors thought I was losing it. Mrs. Chin downstairs would squint at me hauling another pot up the stairs and mutter in broken English, "Too many plants, illegal maybe." But by February, something astonishing happened. New shoots sprouted, buds formed. My little apartment was turning into a lush green jungle. Out of more than 200 plants, at least 150 were not just alive, but thriving. "Maggie, what in the world?" Sarah gasped when I carried the first batch back to the garden center in March. "They look even better than when we bought them new." "Told you they weren't dead," I replied, struggling not to grin too wide. Inside, though, I was doing somersaults. This wasn't just about proving I was right. It was the moment I realized I had stumbled onto a hidden talent that could actually make money. Sarah purchased every single plant back from me at half the original retail value. With that one transaction, I earned $847, more than an entire month's wages at the garden center. But the real treasure wasn't the money. It was that I had found purpose again. The following year, our little arrangement became official. Sarah would set aside all the unsellable plants. I would nurse them through the winter, and in spring, we'd split the profits. It wasn't a fortune, but it was something I could finally call my own. Word started to spread in the gardening world. "That woman at Mitchell's can bring anything back," people whispered. Before long, other garden centers began calling me, offering me their clearance plants too. By the end of year 2, I was earning more from reviving throwaways than from bookkeeping.
I'd upgraded to a bigger apartment with a balcony and, with Jeppy's blessing, turned part of his parking lot into my unofficial greenhouse. The best part? Every plant that came back to life felt like living proof that being discarded didn't equal being worthless. Some things just needed the right touch and the right person to believe in their potential. James and Jessica had tossed me aside, convinced I'd fade away. Instead, I was putting down roots in places they couldn't even imagine. By the third year, I stopped thinking small and started thinking strategically. The demand had grown beyond my little apartment. I had garden centers on a waiting list. My landlord was charging me for plant drainage, and Jeppy was fielding questions from customers who wanted to buy the plants covering his lot. "You need a proper facility," Sarah told me over coffee one morning, "and you need to think bigger than just saving plants." She was right. But scaling up required money I didn't have. My savings had grown to $15,000, a miracle considering I had started with nothing, but it wasn't enough for commercial space. That's when I met Eleanor Rodriguez at the Small Business Development Center. She was sharp, quick, and fearless, the kind of woman who could see opportunity before you did. After looking over my numbers, she leaned back and said, "You're not in the plant rehab business. You're in the business of turning waste into profit. That's a whole different story." Her words cracked something open in me. I wasn't just reviving plants, I was solving a systemic industry problem. Garden centers across the country were throwing away millions in unsold stock every single year. "What if you franchise the process?" Eleanor suggested. "Teach others to do what you do, take a share of their profits, and scale nationwide." The thought was terrifying and exhilarating. Me? A 63-year-old woman who had been homeless just 3 years earlier, running a national business? But the numbers she laid out made it hard to argue. We spent 6 months refining a business plan. The goal, launch a proper facility in Milbrook, streamline and document the rehabilitation process, and then license the system to operators all over the U.S.
was 47 pages long, and I nearly quit 3 times. But Eleanor pushed me to finish, reminding me this wasn't some eccentric hobby. It was a solution to a costly, widespread problem. "Mrs. Williams," the loan officer said during my final interview, "your financial projections seem optimistic." "Sir," I replied, leaning forward with the confidence of someone who'd already been written off and proven everyone wrong, 3 years ago, I was living in a motel with less than $1,000 to my name. Last year, I turned $50,000 worth of discarded plants into $200,000 in revenue. I think my record speaks for itself. The $150,000 loan approval came through on a Tuesday in March. I signed the loan documents in Eleanor's office, my fingers trembling slightly as it sunk in that I was now responsible for more money than I had ever dared to dream of handling. Within 6 months, I had leased a 5,000 square foot warehouse on the edge of town, brought on 2 part-time staff, and secured contracts with 15 garden centers spread across 3 states. Phoenix Plant Recovery, with the motto, "Because everything deserves a second chance," was officially born. The irony wasn't lost on me. My own son had cast me aside as though I was worthless, and now here I was, building an entire business empire on the idea that nothing is truly without value if you can recognize its hidden potential. By year 5, Phoenix Plant Recovery had grown beyond anything I once thought possible. We were active in a dozen states, had 47 licensed operators, and I had just finalized a consulting agreement with Home Depot's regional headquarters. The woman who had once been tossed out like garbage was now being flown first class to corporate boardrooms in Atlanta. Mrs. Williams, your success story is exactly what our industry has been needing, said David Chen, Home Depot's sustainability director, as we walked their flagship store. You've shown that turning waste into profit while protecting the environment isn't just good business, it's the future of retail. I smiled, though inside I was still adjusting to being treated as an expert instead of an inconvenience. The transformation hadn't been simple. There were 18-hour workdays, plenty of failed trials, and more than one night when I wondered if I was in over my head. But each challenge taught me something about business, about resilience, and about myself. My personal life was blossoming too. I had moved into a charming 2-bedroom apartment in Milbrook's historic district, complete with a small garden I used for new plant experiments. I'd made genuine friends, women who enjoyed my company not out of duty, but because they valued me. My weekly book club with Eleanor and 3 other ladies quickly became the highlight of my week. Financially, the numbers were staggering. Phoenix Plant Recovery was bringing in over $2 million annually, and my personal net worth had passed the 7-figure mark. I tracked every cent in detailed spreadsheets, not because I was greedy, but because those numbers represented freedom and independence. Have you considered expanding overseas? My business attorney, Marcus Thompson, asked during one quarterly review. We've been getting serious interest from Canada and the UK. One step at a time, I replied, though the possibility thrilled me. I'd rather do it right than too fast. The truth was, my mind was already on the next stage. This business had shown me that opportunities often hide in plain sight, waiting for someone bold enough to bring them out. I had started quietly investing in other struggling businesses, using the same principle: find the overlooked potential and nurture it into
came
growth.
from the personal triumphs. Like the day I hired 19-year-old Tommy Martinez, a kid everyone else had dismissed, but who had an uncanny gift for plants. Or when Sarah Mitchell, the woman who first took a chance on me, sold her garden center and joined my network as one of my licensed operators in Florida. "You've changed how I see the world," Sarah told me at her retirement party. "Watching you build this from the ground up has inspired half the women in town to take chances they never would have." By then, I had started keeping a journal of lessons learned, partly for future employees, but mostly for myself. The greatest lesson of all? Never let anyone else decide your worth. James and Jessica had judged me as a burden, someone to be discarded. They thought I would fade into nothing. Instead, every contract I signed, every new location I opened, and every success story proved how deeply wrong they had been. And honestly, I was just getting started. What began as a practical step soon transformed into an act of delicious, poetic revenge. After 5 years of apartment living, I needed more space for my growing business and new investments. But instead of just finding a house, I stumbled upon the perfect way to show Milbrook that Margaret Williams was no longer a woman anyone could discard. The Harrison estate, Jennifer Walsh, my realtor, nearly choked when I brought it up. "Maggie, that property hasn't been listed in 40 years. It's the crown jewel of Milbrook Heights." Milbrook Heights, the very neighborhood James and Jessica had always dreamed of but never managed to afford. I remembered them driving through on lazy Sunday afternoons, gazing at the mansions like children pressing their noses against a candy shop window, wishing it could be theirs. "Is it for sale?" I asked calmly. "Well, yes," Jennifer admitted, "but the asking price is $4.2 million. "Let's take a look." The Harrison estate was everything I imagined and more. 12,000 square feet of timeless colonial design spread across 8 acres of flawless landscaping. Inside was a master suite with 2 fireplaces, a mahogany-lined library, a chef's kitchen worthy of royalty, and a sunlit conservatory that doubled as a greenhouse. But the detail that sealed it for me was the view from the master bedroom. The entire town of Milbrook stretched out below, including the modest neighborhood where James and Jessica lived. Every morning, I could literally wake up and look down on the people who once looked down on me. "The sellers are eager," Jennifer explained as we toured the wine cellar. "They've already relocated to Florida and want a quick deal." "Cash offer," I said without hesitation. $3.8 million. Close in 2 weeks. Jennifer almost dropped her briefcase. "Maggie, are you sure? That's enormous." I was more than sure. Phoenix plant recovery was thriving, my investments were strong, and I could make the down payment without touching my core business. But more importantly, I could do it because I had built this success with my own determination, grit, and intelligence. The sellers accepted within 6 hours. 2 weeks later, I stood inside the grand foyer, holding the keys, fighting the urge to laugh at the absurdity. 6 years ago, I had been huddled in a motel room with less than $1,000. Now I owned the most expensive home in the entire county. The moving truck arrived the next morning, and though my modest apartment furniture looked ridiculous in such enormous rooms, it didn't matter. That first evening, I sat on the massive back deck watching the sun set over my 8 acres of quiet, golden land. No traffic, no arguments, only peace, space, and the intoxicating satisfaction of victory. My phone buzzed. A text from Eleanor. "Saw the transfer in the paper. You magnificent woman! Champagne this weekend?" I typed back with a grin. "Bring the good stuff. We're toasting to new beginnings." Was that sometimes beginnings demand endings, and I had a feeling that the chapter with James and Jessica was about to take a very interesting turn. The next morning, as I fumbled in my new kitchen searching for coffee mugs, the doorbell chimed. 9:17 a.m., exactly 24 hours after the sale had hit the local paper. The sound echoed through the marble foyer, and on the security monitor, because yes, this mansion came equipped with a Fort Knox-level system, I saw them standing on my front porch, standing there like door-to-door salespeople. James looked older, streaks of gray showing at his temples, dressed in khakis and a polo that screamed, "Trying too hard." Jessica stood beside him, polished as ever, in designer jeans and a blazer that probably cost more than my first month's rent at Jeppy's. Behind them were 2 teenagers I barely recognized. Emma, now 16, carried her mother's sharp cheekbones, though thankfully not her icy stare. Tony, at 14, looked like James's double at that age, back when he used to bring me dandelions from the yard and build blanket forts in the living room. I didn't rush. My bare feet padded quietly over the heated marble floors as I made my way to the front door. 6 years of silence, and they chose the very morning after the real estate transfer hit the paper to suddenly remember my existence. Predictable didn't even begin to cover it. "Well, well," I said, opening the door but keeping the screen in place. "James, Jessica, children I barely know." My eyes moved slowly over them, catching Jessica's carefully painted face and James's nervous shifting. "Mom," James said, his voice breaking slightly, we saw the news about the house. We wanted to congratulate you." "How thoughtful," I replied evenly, still not inviting them inside. "Congratulations delivered. Anything else?" Jessica stepped forward, wearing that plastic smile I remembered so well. "Maggie, we've had a lot of time to think. We realize now we handled things badly 6 years ago." "Handled things badly," I repeated slowly, tasting the words like something sour. "Is that what we're calling it these days?" Emma shifted uncomfortably, then spoke in a small voice. "Grandma Maggie, I don't really remember you, but Mom and Dad said you made the best chocolate chip cookies." Her innocent comment struck harder than any fake apology.
She was right. She barely remembered me because her parents had stolen those years from both of us. 6 years of birthdays, plays, bedtime stories, gone. Forever. "I did make good cookies," I said softly, my gaze lingering on Emma before turning back to her parents. "At least until I was tossed out like garbage." "Mom, please," James pleaded. "Can we come in? Can we talk?" "Talk about what exactly?" I asked, my tone sharper now. For just a moment, Jessica's carefully constructed mask slipped, revealing the calculating woman beneath. "Families should stay together, Maggie, especially when," her hand gestured vaguely towards the house behind me, "when there's plenty of room for everyone." And there it was, the real reason for their visit, delivered with all the subtlety of a hammer. "Room for everyone," I mused aloud. "How convenient that you've discovered family loyalty now that I have 12,000 square feet." "That's not fair," James protested, but his eyes betrayed him as they roamed the foyer behind me, silently tallying value. "We've missed you. The kids have missed having a grandmother." I laughed, an actual, genuine laugh at the absurdity. "James, darling, you tossed me out with nothing but 2 suitcases and a cardboard box. Jessica told me I was too set in my ways and that figuring out my future wasn't your problem. And now suddenly you miss me." The silence that followed was thick, until finally Tony spoke. "Dad, what is she talking about?" "Why don't you come in, since you're so eager for a family reunion?" I led them through the grand foyer, past the glittering chandelier and sweeping marble staircase, into the living room with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the estate grounds. I watched their faces carefully as they took it all in. The silk wallpaper, the Persian rugs, the art worth more than most cars. "This place is amazing," Tony breathed, pressing his face to the glass. "Mom, look at the pool." Jessica was looking all right. I could practically see her brain calculating square footage and property value. "It's certainly spacious," she said carefully. "Much too big for one person." "Is it?" I replied, lowering myself into my favorite chair, a velvet navy wingback I'd bought especially for this room. "I find I rather like having the space to breathe." James perched on the edge of the sofa, sitting stiffly as though afraid to wrinkle the fabric. "Mom, about what happened 6 years ago," James began cautiously. "We were under a lot of pressure. The new mortgage, my job was shaky, Jessica was juggling full-time work and 2 small kids. So the natural solution," I cut in, "was to make your widowed mother homeless. Very logical." "We thought you'd land on your feet," Jessica replied defensively. "You've always been so independent, so capable. We never imagined you'd actually end up in a motel." "You never imagined it because you never bothered to check,"
Emma
I
was
said,
studying
raising an
a
eyebrow.
framed photo on the side table, one of the very few I had kept from my old life. It showed James as a boy of about 8, perched on my lap as I read him a bedtime story. "Dad, you were so little," Emma murmured. "That picture was taken right after your grandfather left," I told her. "For the next 10 years, it was just your father and me. I worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table. I made sure he had everything he needed for school. I drove him to baseball practice every Tuesday and Thursday." I locked eyes with James. I thought that meant something. "It did mean something," James said quietly. "It means everything. That's why we're here." "No," I corrected him firmly. "You're here because you want something. The only question is whether you'll admit what it is or keep pretending this is about family bonding." Jessica's mask cracked. "Fine," she snapped. "Yes, we need help. James lost his job 3 months ago. We're behind on the mortgage. Emma needs money for college applications. Happy now?" "Deliriously," I said dryly. "Now we're getting somewhere." "The thing is," James began, shooting her a warning glance,
We were thinking you have all this space and we're struggling with housing. You want to move in, I said flatly. It wasn't a question. Just temporarily, Jessica rushed to add, until James finds another job. 6 months, maybe a year at most. I glanced around my beautiful, peaceful living room. Silk wallpaper, Persian rugs, sunlight pouring through tall windows, and then back at the people who had once tossed me aside like old furniture. Let me be clear, I said slowly. You want to move your entire family into my house because you're having money problems? We're family, James repeated, like the word itself was a key that could unlock my front door. Family, I echoed. Is that what you called it when you shoved my suitcases onto your porch? When you told me figuring out my life wasn't your concern? The silence that followed was only broken by the ticking of the antique clock on the mantel. Finally, Tony spoke, his voice uncertain. What happened 6 years ago? Why won't anyone just tell me? I looked at the two teenagers, the grandchildren I'd been robbed of knowing, and made a decision. Sit down, I told them, both of you. It's time you heard the truth about your parents. Mom, don't, James warned, but I raised a hand to silence him. Emma, Tony, 6 years ago, your grandfather passed away. I was 60, widowed, and I needed somewhere to stay while I figured out my next steps. Your parents invited me to live with them. For 3 months, I helped take care of you, contributed my Social Security checks to household bills, and did my best not to get in the way. The teens listened closely, their faces serious. Then, one morning, your mother announced I was too set in my ways and told me to leave immediately. Your father packed my suitcases into 2 suitcases and set them on the porch. I had $847 to my name and no place to go. That's not how it happened, Jessica cut in sharply. You interfered with our parenting. You undermined our authority with the children. I made them breakfast, I said simply, and reminded them to say please and thank you. Apparently, that was undermining. Tony frowned. But where did you go? What did you do? I lived in a motel for 6 weeks, then moved into a tiny studio above a pizza place. I got a part-time job at a garden center for $15 an hour. I smiled faintly at the memory. Best thing that ever happened to me, actually. How is being homeless the best thing that ever happened to you? Emma asked softly. Because it proved I didn't need anyone to rescue me. I was more than capable of rescuing myself. In fact, I'd say I did better than fine. Jessica's mask of patience was slipping fast. This is all ancient history, Maggie. We're here to move forward, to rebuild our relationship. No, I cut her off sharply. You're here to rebuild your bank account. Don't confuse the two. I pulled out my phone and held it up. This came in from Nancy Martinez this morning. She works at the unemployment office, recognized a familiar name in her files. My eyes locked on James. You weren't laid off 3 months ago. You were fired 6 months ago for falsifying expense reports. How did you— I know things, James, I said simply. I know Jessica opened 3 credit cards last year and maxed them out on clothes and spa trips. I know you refinanced the house twice just to fund that vacation to Italy. I know you're not a little behind on your mortgage. You're staring down foreclosure
I went on,
next month.
My voice lower, sharper, that you drove past my motel every single day for 6 months after you threw me out. You knew exactly where I was. You knew I was barely surviving, and you never once stopped. Emma's eyes welled up. Dad, is that true? James couldn't bring himself to meet her gaze. Jessica, however, was ready for a fight. Fine, we made mistakes. So did you. You could have asked us for help instead of vanishing for 6 years. I laughed, cold and humorless. Asked for help? From the people who told me my life wasn't their problem? From the daughter-in-law who labeled me a burden? You weren't young and stressed. You were cruel. Jessica flinched. And now, I continued quietly, you want me to erase all of it just because you're desperate. Tony suddenly stood, his cheeks burning red. This is messed up, his voice cracked. Dad, you told us Grandma Maggie moved to Florida to live with her sister. You said she didn't want us anymore. We never said that exactly, James muttered weakly. Yes, you did, Emma burst out, standing too. You said she chose her new life over being part of ours. You made us believe she abandoned us. Vindication coursed through me, though it carried a sting of grief. They'd been robbed of 6 years with me, poisoned by lies their parents told to protect their pride. There's something else you should know, I said gently. About 6 months after I left your house, your father came to see me. Jessica's head whipped toward James. What? You never told her? I asked, raising my brows. Well, that's interesting. James was sweating now, his polo clinging to his back. Mom, please. He showed up at my apartment one Tuesday evening. He was drinking. He cried, said he missed me, said he'd made a terrible mistake, begged me to come back. You're lying, Jessica snapped, though her tone had lost its bite. I unlocked my phone and scrolled, then held it up. I took a photo of the letter he left me that night. Would you like me to read it out loud? The letter was 3 handwritten pages on yellow legal pad paper. In it, James apologized over and over for letting Jessica push him into discarding me. He admitted the house felt hollow without me, that he regretted choosing his wife's comfort over my dignity. But the last paragraph was the nail in the coffin. He begged me not to tell Jessica he'd been there, confessing that she had already threatened to leave him if he ever tried to bring me back. He chose you, I told Jessica calmly. He chose keeping you satisfied over doing the right thing by his own mother. And he's been lying to you all about it for 6 years. Jessica's face twisted in fury as she turned to James. What? You went behind my back? You wrote her a letter? I was drunk, James mumbled. No, I countered softly. That was the clearest thinking you'd done in months, and that's what scared you. Emma's tears were streaming now. 6 years, she whispered. We missed 6 years with you because of their lies. I stood, smoothing the silk blouse over my shoulders. I'm not the woman you threw out 6 years ago. That woman was broken, dependent, willing to accept scraps of affection from people who saw her as a burden. This woman runs a multi-million-dollar company. She has true friends who respect her, employees who count on her, and investments that generate in a single month more than your father earned in an entire year at his job. This woman doesn't need handouts, especially not from the very people who once discarded her like garbage and now want to move in because they've ruined their own finances. The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only when Tony finally asked in a small, trembling voice, So, you don't want a relationship with us? Not even now that we know the truth? My heart ached, but I kept my tone even. I want a relationship with you, with Emma. You're innocent in all this. But your parents? My eyes locked onto James and Jessica. They'll have to prove they deserve a place in my life, if they ever can. Jessica rose suddenly, her false sweetness gone at last. This is insane. We are your family, Maggie. You can't just choose which parts of us you accept. Watch me,
I said calmly. Fine, Jessica snapped. If you want to punish us for something that happened 6 years ago, then we're leaving. Come on, James. Kids, we're done here. But Emma didn't move. Neither did Tony. They sat on my velvet sofa, staring between their parents and me, their faces a mixture of shock and betrayal. Actually, Emma said quietly, I want to stay and talk to Grandma Maggie. Alone. Emma, we're leaving, Jessica ordered sharply. No, Emma's voice was stronger now. I'm 16, and I just found out you lied to me for 6 years about my grandmother. I want to hear her story. Tony nodded firmly. Me too. Jessica's face twisted in fury, but James gently placed a hand on her arm. Maybe we should let them stay, he said softly. Don't you dare take her side, she hissed. I'm not taking sides, James replied carefully. But when he looked at me, there was something in his eyes, regret maybe, that reminded me of the boy I'd once raised. Then it was gone. Fine, Jessica said through clenched teeth. But this isn't over, Maggie. We'll be back. No, I said coldly. You won't. Not unless I invite you. This is my home, my property, and it's protected. Show up again without permission, and I'll have you arrested for trespassing. Jessica's face turned crimson. You can't keep us from our children. I'm not, I replied. Emma and Tony are welcome here anytime they want, but you and James, not until you prove you've changed. How? James asked, his voice hoarse. Start, I said, by telling your kids the whole truth about what you did, not the story you've been spinning for years. The truth. Then, get your finances in order without expecting me to save you. Prove you can stand like adults on your own feet. And then, maybe we'll talk about forgiveness. Maybe. But don't hold your breath. After they left, I sat with Emma and Tony for 2 hours, answering their questions, showing them photo albums from their father's childhood, and listening to their stories about school, their friends, and the dreams they had for the future. They were good kids, despite everything their parents had done. And in their laughter and curiosity, I could still see glimmers of the little boy I once raised. Can we come back next weekend? Emma asked as I walked them to the door. Anytime you like, I promised warmly. I have 6 years of grandmothering to make up for.